Hello everybody, welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. Today we find ourselves back out on the road again after several years, dare I say it, break, and usually doing these podcasts remotely via laptops and internet connections. I'm delighted to say that we've taken the podcast studio back out on the road. We are in London, we're at the home of Crucial Effects and their Origin experience, and at the very start of today's episode I should offer my sincerest thanks to the guys at Crucial Effects for hosting us today, for allowing us to set up in their office space, and also for giving us a bit of a taster of the Origin experience. If you want to find out a bit more yourselves, head over to Twitter. Their Twitter handle is @origin_London. So on with today's episode, and we welcome, sat opposite me in today's podcast studio, Niles Brody. Niles is the Director of Catering, Conferencing and Events for Twickenham Stadium and joins the podcast today to talk about the brand new East stand that was launched and unveiled last year. Niles, thanks for joining the podcast today.
No problem, thank you very much.
For those who are not aware, Twickenham, I think now is the largest dedicated rugby stadium in the world, 82,000 capacity. But this is a long-term project to completely redevelop the offering that you've got within the East Stand. Tell us a little bit more, about the redevelopment and why it was thought up.
So the redevelopment takes Twickenham's hospitality from 4,500 to 8,500 of traditional hospitality and moves it inside the stadium. So the original concept was to control the brand and to control the hospitality product that's offered by both the RFU and Twickenham Stadium, and move some of the outside operators that have traditionally serviced rugby hospitality goers externally from the stadium, and to bring them inside to the stadium so that both the brand, the offer and the revenue sits within both the Twickenham Stadium and the RFU. And
this is not just a lick of paint. For those of people who are not aware of this is not just a bit of a refurbishment. This was a massive undertaking over 5 floors that's completely transformed, first of all, the external look of that particular stand.
Correct. It was a completely redevelopment of the whole East Stand, adding 4,500 covers into the East Stand. Prior to that was about 1,500 hospitality covers in that part of the stadium, and added another 3,000 on top of that. So complete redevelopment, adding in 2 new floors and a whole new extension off the back of the stadium to extend the footprint and the floor space of the building.
Many of our podcast listeners will be aware of sports stadia hospitality, but as I understand it, and I've not seen it firsthand, but I've seen a lot of pictures, read up a lot of information prior to today's podcast. This is quite a significant rethink in how stadium hospitality is actually delivered, isn't it?
Oh, completely. So we've moved away from a traditional banqueting round table and traditional cloths and a 3-course plated meal with no choice, to having a variety of options from interactive street food style with pizza ovens and help yourself grab and go type things, right the way through to 5-course taster meals with top end Michelin star style food served in a very inviting environment with big floor space per person, pitch views, and really kind of comfortable environment, and everything in between.
How did the sort of consultation process manifest itself when you were looking into what you would like to do with the East Stand? You mentioned that you've got all of these different types of catering options and food options that are available now to guests. How did that process begin and end?
So it was a fairly collaborative approach between all of our key stakeholders, so Compass Group, the RFU, and Keith Prowse, who are our principal sales partner. Looked at this hospitality market as a whole, looked at what was selling at other big international and national events, and then combined that with the rugby goer and what the rugby goer is looking for, and then designed all the different concepts around both price point and the want of the customer, whether they're entertaining for business purposes or for as a private individual, and kind of designed the concepts in line with that, and did a great job at it, I must say.
And when we look at the scale of a stadium the size of Twickenham, you are inevitably going to have people with varying degrees of taste or desire for what they want out of either a match day hospitality experience or even just an event experience in somewhere like that. So actually breaking out of what may be seen as a traditional mould of corporate hospitality or event hospitality, it did need a bit of a rethink to cater for those people.
Completely, and we need to take some of those customers on a journey. So like we said, we've got the Rose Garden that sits up on level 5, top tier seating, but the environment and space is very cool. So it moves away from having a traditional round table and is vertical. So it's not allocated seating. There's a live band that plays, interactive pizza oven with chefs out front cooking. You got this rotisserie area that people can help themselves and kind of grab and go, and then drinks are flowing all the way through. So it's a great party atmosphere. So taking that traditional kind of stuffy corporate environment and moving it to attract both business and personal, but people who want to spend a bit more and have an experience rather than just kind of stand on the concourses and have a beer.
When you take the changes out of the match day experience, and undoubtedly a huge amount of the focus of the redevelopment would have been on the experience that you can give people who are coming to watch rugby fixtures at the stadium. Mm-hmm. Inevitably, you have to have a very, very close eye on what you can do for event organisers coming in to look at the space that's non-match day. How much focus was given on that element of the business when you were undertaking the redevelopment?
A huge amount, and actually a lot of conversation and some heated conversations around who takes precedent, the event on a non-rugby day or a rugby day, which is 10, 15 times a year. And I think in the East End we have balanced it quite nicely. So while we've got the high street restaurant style facility and the gate on the ground floor, we've also then got the lock, which is slightly more traditional in its hospitality sense, but then does cater for your traditional conferencing and events with a twist. So you've still got your pitch views, you've got breakout areas within the room, and you can then cater for a traditional conferencing style on one level, and then try and move them across to having an experience in the evening or the morning in a restaurant style environment, which is where we want customers to move to. We don't want traditional events with traditional kind of breakout sessions and evening dinners. We want people to start thinking outside the box, really, and take what people expect on the high street and move it into a stadium.
Well, I was going to ask, just looking at the rundown of the offering within the East Stand now and mm-hmm. how much spectrum there is there, is there very much an element where now event organisers looking at the space need to think a little bit differently to how they would look on, quote unquote, a more traditional event space?
Definitely, and we've had several clients, both internal customers that we use us regularly and new customers coming to us, where it takes a bit of convincing to get the booker of that event to think slightly outside the box and move away from your traditional style to having a much more personalised experience, much more smaller tables, more choice in your menu offers, and adding risk to their event. But in reality, if we can do it for 15,000 covers on a match day, we can do it for 200-300 people on a non-match day. And getting organisers and bookers to think in high street terms and bring that level of service into a conference and corporate environment is tricky, but when people understand it and can see the vision, they really buy into it, and it works really well.
We've spoken a lot about, I suppose, the catering side of the offering that's now available within the East Stand, and undoubtedly that plays a huge part of the redevelopment. Mm-hmm. But when you were going through that process and identifying what you could offer event organisers on a non-match day, what other elements of the redevelopment did you consider in terms of infrastructure? So people will come in with certain power requirements for temporary events, they will want certain AV projection, connectivity. That was all considered?
Yeah, of course. So it kind of goes without saying, these days everyone wants or expects Wi-Fi and connection to be just available, and building in audiovisual capability, so big screens hidden behind, cleverly hidden behind spaces, state-of-the-art sound equipment going in. So it has all been thought through across all the spaces, but leaving an element of being able to bespoke. So yes, you're 3-phase power in the right place, and being able to get to the right place across the building is important. If you wanted a band in the Rose Garden, that's all set up for a band. So there is, there's a level of, you can bring your own things and do your own thing, but we've got a level of capability within the building itself.
That's interesting, because having gone in and out of a lot of venues, there is a level of, I suppose, afterthought that you can tell has happened in certain venues. You know, they've either undergone a refurb, but not thought about all of those little different elements. And being able to cater for a band might seem like a very sort of small thing, but actually, if you've got events coming in and out that regularly have live music, having somewhere that's been specifically thought out from day one to cater for that type of thing is a huge bonus to a venue.
Definitely, and people don't think a stadium is capable of that. You know, people think a stadium is primarily a stadium and sports venue, not a corporate business conferencing kind of event space. But it's actually the reverse. It's we need to fill the other days that aren't sport, and we need to attract customers that are going to use it. And we've been very successful at having product launches and exhibitions, and one day a room's used for a traditional theatre style conference, and the next day it's Formula One kind of a car in there. So it's a great space and very flexible.
And did you speak to event organisers or agencies or production people during the process of planning how you wanted the finished East Stand to look and work? You know, again, was there a consultation there with people to get their advice as to what they would need?
Yeah, there was. Several of the big agents in London came along. We had a collaborative approach again with Compass, who operate many venues around the country. Both their conference and events team and their sports teams came within the circle and advised and pointed in the right direction and criticised the plans, and then changes were made according to their their ambitions and what they think the customers and the industry was looking for. So.
Sure. And something you mentioned just about things like the screens, you know, and having them placed in certain areas or hidden. Is there a level of adaptability that was incorporated into the design of the entire stadium so that it could be changed and adapted, rooms could be scaled up or down, etc.?
Yeah, lots of the spaces are dividable, or dividable naturally. So part of our East Wing concept is, it seats 1,000 people across a nearly 120 metre long room,
right.
But you can still have a dinner for 120 in there and feel like you're in a very private top-end London bar, and have a drinks reception at the bar and move across into a private area of the restaurant. So while you're in a room for 1,000, you wouldn't know it. So,
and I have to say, just looking at the photos, and if anybody wants to go and have a look at it through some of the images that I'm looking at, twickenhamstadium.com is the website to go to, and it's quite obvious that this doesn't look like a traditional, sports hospitality area. Gone are the flowery carpets and the bland beige walls. This is very much like walking into a completely modern, bespoke environment that you wouldn't know at first. My instinct looking at the photos is you wouldn't realise if somebody dropped you in there blindfolded, took the blindfold off, you wouldn't know you were in a sports stadium.
No, we've got different finishes across all the levels. So from rough brick to a chop house style with wine bottles coming out of the wall and really kind of high level design. Our East Wing has marble tables, that are nearly a ton in weight. So there's a lot of different touchy-feely bits around the venue.
So far, when was it officially launched?
We opened for the South Africa game in beginning of November.
Okay.
3rd of November, we opened the doors. We had a couple of test events prior to that, but the official launch was November. And since then, we've had both the Autumn Internationals, the Six Nations, and getting on with hundreds of events now coming through the doors.
I don't know if this is something you would know off the top of your head, but my instinct would suggest that actually there's the stadium itself only has so many days a year where it's actually hosting rugby matches. Therefore, the majority of your days are actually non-match day.
Yeah, so events where the pitch is used, so not just rugby, but for concerts and other events, we're talking about 20 to 25 in any given year. So the other 340 days of the year we're open for business for across multiple events. So we don't just do one event a day. We have, I think 27 spaces around the venue that can range from 1,000 to down to 10 people. So. And
something you just mentioned there about the concerts, it's long been used as a major summer outdoor concert stadium. Has the East Stand, or will it affect the offering that you're able to talk to with live concert promoters in terms of what they can achieve and do for their audiences when you're hosting music events?
Very much so. And the East Stand, several of the rooms have pitch views, and that lends itself to a concert where you not necessarily want to be outside all of the time. So you might want to go outside for the main event, but for the run up and the atmosphere, you want to be in a dining space or at a bar that has a pitch view and get a hold of the atmosphere, but sit inside, which is great, and our spaces offer all of that and more. So yeah, people definitely. It will take time for people to understand it and to get used to it. And I think Metallica coming this summer will be the first time the East Stand is properly used as a venue for both hospitality and just vertical drinking and vertical use for the concert.
And you mentioned at the start of today's episode that there was an element of bringing some of the external hospitality that used to be outside the stadium and actually bringing that in, so that you were in control of it, so it was incorporated within the actual stadium building itself. What's now going to happen with those spaces there? Are there further plans to sort of now redevelop other areas, given that you've been able to bring a lot of it inside the stadium walls?
Well, a lot of those spaces were completely outside the stadium, as in they were in fields and car parks and places that they just found around the Twickenham area. So, which is why the brand was being misrepresented in some of those spaces, just from a product delivery perspective. So those places have gone back to their traditional use. The stadium itself is looking at developing the external areas of the stadium to be much more fan friendly and to bring people to the stadium earlier and give them a better experience. So we recently moved the fence line out and incorporated into the West Fan Village, so you're in the stadium once you're in the main entertainment area, and that just improves the customer journey. So the whole experience, from public and just a normal ticket within the ground through to hospitality, has been thought through, and you can have an experience that is a pie and a pint or a burger, all the way through to your top end hospitality.
With such a huge focus, and rightly so, on this redevelopment of one particular stand within a stadium, we shouldn't forget the fact that the stadium has 4 stands. It's 4-sided. It's not just one. How has the development and the launch of this new offering in the East Stand affected the other hospitality areas, or what goes on in the other stands in the stadium?
Well, that's part of the beauty of it. So it's about 50% of our hospitality capability is the East Stand, and the rest of the building still attracts a traditional hospitality goer. So companies that have traditionally bought tables of 10 can still buy their tables of 10. And then we now offer the flexibility for them to move away from that, or at certain events and other less formal events have another option.
Right.
And it gives them much more flexibility in that space.
Timeline-wise, I'm sure I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was about an 18-month process of redevelopment. So during that 18-month process, how, operationally speaking, did you maintain standards within the facility and not affect the match day experience negatively whilst you're undergoing what must have been a significant sort of construction phase?
Yeah, it was an incredibly quick 18 months to put up a massive structure was incredibly quick, and with the time pressure of having a match day where you have to have the ground open it was tricky. Fortunately, as it is a complete bolt-on, to use to describe it, was advantageous, because we could literally segregate the whole of the East Stand off and still had our majority of our spaces available for both rugby, sport and non-match day use. So it didn't really impact us hugely. We lost a bit of space, but we carried on as business as usual, and then just opened up the East Stand and carried on.
Since it's been launched, have you gone about making this known, I suppose, to event organisers? Because we've spoken fairly in depth about what's available within the facility and how event organisers could come in and actually really get the creative juices flowing, looking at what's available. Have you had open days? Have you had invite events where you've been able to bring people in to actually look at it and get some feedback? Yeah,
we've had 2 or 3 open days, fam trips, both from using Keith Prowse and their client base together with England Rugby Hospitality and their client base, and the non-match day team all collaborating together to bring in kind of a whole selection of clients, guests and users of the space. We then also segregated off and had bespoke non-match day events, bringing in press, magazines and consultants and the like to have a look at the space to get their creative juices flowing, so that they can help us convince customers what is out there and what's the art of the possible within the space.
Have you given thought to what other stadium operators may do now that you've gone through this transformation and this adoption, I suppose, of a new way of thinking when it comes to the hospitality within your own stadium? Are you hoping that now this will be seen as somewhat of a benchmark or a raising of the bar or a shifting of expectations?
Yeah, very much so. And we're hoping a lot of other sporting events and just event owners will see us as a flagship and something to aspire to. And if you look at redevelopments around the country, the new Tottenham Stadium is a prime example. They're doing exactly, they didn't steal it from us by any stretch of the imagination, but the industry is going in this direction for a much more flexible environment, much more bespoke, much more high levels of service and particularly food expectation. The whole food trend is moving much more kind of bespoke and creating a unique experience rather than just being in a room, being one of a number in a room.
Something that I've touched on very frequently in recent editions of the podcast is the subject of sustainability and how venues and event organisers are rethinking the whole subject of sustainability. Is it something that was on the agenda during the redevelopment process?
Yeah, very completely on the agenda, and Twickenham has been a kind of a leader in that field in the stadium world for quite a long time, with things like the Eco Cup, with sending zero plastic, single-use plastic to landfill for several years. So that, as part of the East Stand development, they then built in a lot of energy-saving devices. So all the hot water is state-of-the-art, the heating, the lighting is all on as required and low energy. So they've completely thought about it from start to finish. Still more to do, but certainly that was part of the build. And then as part of the kind of kitchen infrastructure and the creation of the menu and the concepts, while it offers choice, it is designed to push people in one direction and to limit waste as much as possible, given the expectation from the customer.
Well, one thing I've not asked yet is from a brand activation point of view. I know that there are a number of major brands that are involved in things like the Six Nations that will have activation areas in and around the stadium. Were you able to work with any of those sort of brand partners of tournaments like the Six Nations to actually be able to develop areas within the East Stand that they could use as activations and do stuff during the tournament?
Within the East Stand, it's not a traditional space that has been used by partners and that of the RFU. However, British Airways has obviously branded the British Airways Rose Garden as one of their spaces. They use that space for both match day and not match day use. They will be celebrating their 100-year anniversary with us in August, and they are activating all the way through the East Stand with little touches of British Airways. Some of the more traditional partners, Guinness Six Nations as an example, they tend to focus on the masses and be out in the public spaces, so they haven't used the East Stand to its capability yet, although they are talking to us on a non-match day perspective and how do they launch products and how do they maintain visibility through their client base. And we, the bigger partners, O2 and Guinness and the like, are talking to us quite regularly on holding events with us of every nature.
How long will you wait, I suppose is the right way of phrasing it, before you start looking at other areas of the stadium? Are you hoping that once you've been able to generate and log a certain amount of feedback as a result of opening the redeveloped East Stand, are you going to then look at that as a way of maybe identifying smaller areas that you could redevelop as well? Are there other parts that you'd like to do?
Yeah, we never really stop. We're kind of redesigning space all the time. We're improving the space all the time. Adding in new technologies all the time into all the spaces across the building. Obviously, the East Stand is a significant investment from the RFU and its shareholders. Big development plans, not currently for hospitality, but we're looking at the fan experience outside the stadium and what can we do to enhance that experience and bring people along at all levels, not just at the exclusive hospitality end.
You mentioned Tottenham's new stadium, which is big news today, particularly as we sit and record today's podcast. It is Wednesday the 3rd of April, and it's the day that Tottenham will host their first Premier League match at their new stadium. To put it into perspective, because I'm not sure when this particular episode is going to be published, but that's a cashless stadium. Is the cashless side of things something that has been looked on with the East Stand in your own facility?
Yeah, it's something we haven't really shouted about, but we are fully cashless, 100% across the board at Twickenham, and have been for nearly 18 months now. So it's not a new concept to us. You can't really spend cash at us. We allow the kids to spend some cash at Pick and Mix and other small places around the ground, but we're 100% cashless already. So I think all new stadiums and are going that direction, and old stadiums alike are moving towards that kind of card-only transaction. It's much quicker and more efficient.
And sure, that from what I've read, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the sort of the technological side of things within the stadium. I've read that you very much want to be seen as a pioneer of technology in terms of sports stadia, and that flows down to things like something I read about silent technology being used in the restaurants to help waiters and chefs. We've mentioned on the cashless side of things as well. What are some of the real sort of technological advances that you're really proud of when you look at the stadium?
Yeah, so maybe not new to the industry, but certainly new to stadiums and corporate hospitality entertaining. We've worked with our till company, Capture and QSR, to bring in this kind of what I term as silent kitchen technology, and allowing waiters and the customers to place orders front of house, to then that electronically relates back to the kitchen and gives a very clear production list to the kitchen, and sets the time standard. So gone are the days of the old clipboard and nails in a board in the kitchen. And so if you're going to deliver to 15,000 people in a 3-hour period, you need to rely on technology, or you'd be silly not to rely on technology to help you do that. And while it's been had a lot of success with it, we've got more to do, and we still want to introduce more technology in areas where we see slower service, or we see a slight we're not hitting what our expectation of the customer experience should be. So we're working with a technology team on an ongoing basis to connect people, to make the journey easier and to make service more seamless, and that does pay dividend in the end.
And all the technology that we're talking about here has to dovetail almost seamlessly, doesn't it? I don't know if you have a dedicated app for the stadium that people can go on and use as part of this.
Not yet. That's coming in summer this year. So we're working together with the technology team and British Airways as a partner. That's one of the commitments of the stadium, is to develop an app and move across to digital ticketing, and bring the kind of the general fan population along that journey as well.
And one thing I should touch on, which, because it's always a sensitive subject within the events industry, is connectivity. What redevelopment in terms of specifics can you tell us about that went into the connectivity side of things, the Wi-Fi network, the hardwired networks, the 4G networks that are available? I'm
no expert, but I know the RFU technology team worked really closely with their partner O2, and to make predominantly the East Stand, but the whole stadium is now fully Wi-Fi'd up. You can't see it in the bowl yet, and that's still a challenge for most stadiums around the world, actually. But connectivity at the stadium from a Wi-Fi perspective is great. If you're there as a fan, 80,000 people coming in and trying to connect all at once is still difficult, and most stadiums will understand what I'm talking about. But it is tough. But the technology team are moving all the time, so having cashless and putting Wi-Fi in the car parks and things is a key priority for them.
But I guess going back to what we were talking about earlier on in terms of opening up the new East Stand for events outside of matchday hospitality, if you can cater in some way for 82,000 people in the stadium at once, and you've put a network in that is designed to try and cope with that amount of people, hosting events for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people is going to be pretty straightforward from a connectivity point of view. 100%.
And we've hosted esports events, so we have a dedicated fibre optic line that we can dedicate to them, and they love that. And there's big events and companies out there that demand a high secure network, and we've got that coming into the stadium. You might not be able to do that for 80,000 people, but for a one-off event in the stadium, that's a given these days. And I think you can't open in a venue like Twickenham, being the national stadium, and not offer state-of-the-art internet connection as a basic.
Absolutely. We've been talking on today's podcast to Niles Brodie. Niles is the Director of Catering, Conferencing and Events for Twickenham Stadium, talking about the rebuild of the East Stand, an 18-month project that culminated in the stand being opened for the South Africa match in November last year. And Niles, thanks very much for joining the podcast today. As I said a little bit earlier on, if anybody wants to go and have a look at some of the pictures and the information about the stand, twickenhamstadium.com is the website to go to. There's plenty of good information on there. Loads of information for event organisers, all the facts and figures that you'll need, and I'm sure if you've got anything else to ask, you'll be able to get in touch with the guys at Twickenham Stadium directly. Niles, thanks very much again for joining the podcast. The podcast that is on the road again. As I said at the top of today's episode, we have dug the microphones and the stands and the mixing desks out of the cupboard. We've hopped on a train. We've come down to London, to the home of Crucial Effects and their Origin experience. They've hosted us today. It's been great to have the podcast back out on the road. Thanks very much to the guys at Crucial Effects. And if you want to find out anything more about that, on Twitter is @origin_London. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thanks very much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.